All right, so now we're on the hand tool safety rules. This is the third part 3 of my safety review and for my woodshop class. And we're gonna skip number 1. We're gonna go on to number 2. Check to be sure the handles is tight before using the tool. The hand tools, when you're working with hand tool, you need to make sure the handles are tight. Got a hand tool, the handle is loose while you're working, it's not going to work efficiently unless you want to make sure that whatever tool you're using is working the way that it was intended to work. Okay, whether you're working with a coping saw or a file or a table saw or band saw, which is all wood 2 stuff or advanced students work stuff, but or the sanders or the different tools we use around here, you want to make sure that the tool is working the way that it was intended to work so you get the best results. So if you're working with a hand tool like this and the handle is loose and moving around on you, it's not going to work as well as you'd like. So just be aware that when you're working with hand tools, you need to make sure the handles are tight. Number 6, oh actually number 2, 3, 4, and 5 seem to all be about the same thing, and that's about sharp tools. So let's talk about sharp tools, because this goes for life in general, because we use sharp tools lots of different places. You have knives at home. We have X-Acto knives that you might be using in your art class. We have lots of different sharp implements that you use throughout your life, and there's a proper way to go about using them. Number 1 and most significant and important about using a sharp tool, and the thing you just need to stick into your head for the rest of your life, is when you're working with something that's sharp, you never cut towards yourself, or anyone else for that matter. So, the boy who injured himself once upon a time in my classroom, I wish I had a rabbit, not being the fluffy little bunny rabbit, but a woodworking joint called a rabbit. He had a board and he was trying to chisel on the board. I'll just pretend this is that board. He had a board and he was trying to chisel the board, and the board was moving on him and he was getting frustrated. And in the end, he finally said, you know what, forget it, I'm just gonna do that. And then he stuck himself in the hand with a chisel. He got a very small cut on his hand that day, but it could have been a very bad cut. That's one of the things that I worry about most in this class, is the kids sticking themselves in the hand with a chisel. The reason they would do that is typically this is not a terribly scary thing. People look at this, kids look at this, and they don't think it's very scary, but it's sharp. And if they stab themselves in the hand, they could do some significant damage. Therefore, when you're using a chisel or anything sharp-bladed tool, you never cut towards yourself. The boy in question should have secured his work down to the tabletop, and then he would have been able to work with the chisel safely without having to stick his hand out in front and do that. Once again, that kid was fine. It made me very nervous because of the potential injury that it could have been, but it was not. So step 1, you never cut towards yourself when you're working with a sharp edge tool. Step 2, you want your tools to be sharp. You shouldn't be thinking of sharp tools as being more dangerous than their duller cousins. If this tool is dull, it's not going to work very well. The boy in question who was chiseling was having trouble chiseling. And what did he do? He got frustrated because his chisel wasn't working very well, and so he did something dangerous. This is typically what happens when dangerous things happen around here. It's common for that to happen when somebody's frustrated or stressed out about something. So if this tool is really, really sharp, then it should work the way you want it to work, and therefore you can keep your mind on what you're doing and you're less likely to hurt yourself. If it's dull, then you're more likely to injure yourself by doing something that you shouldn't be doing. Okay, so sharp tools are safer than dull tools is what you want to be thinking, which is counterintuitive because you generally think if it's sharper, it's going to hurt me more, but that's not typically the case. There's also a proper way to carry this thing across the room, and you're going to have to kind of follow me on this one. So there is a way to carry this thing across the room, and the proper way to carry this thing across the room is not the way I was just doing it, but this. Down at your side, loosely, with the point away from you and anyone else, so that as I'm walking across the room, if I get bumped, I'm going to drop it and grab a hold of something to support myself and let this thing hit the ground. I would not be wearing open-toe shoes in class generally, so I'm not going to be worried about dropping it on my foot. This doesn't just mean in the wood shop, this means in life in general. You're carrying a pair of scissors across the room, you're carrying a steak knife across the room, it's the same thing. loosely at your side with the point away from you and others. Let's talk about some things you don't want to do. You don't want to carry it across the room like this. Because I'm walking forward, I trip, my hand naturally wants to seize this thing and grab a hold of something because I've got something in my hand to grab a hold of, like this, and I'm more likely to walk into somebody and hurt them. Okay, if I'm walking across the room like this and I fall, once again my hand seizes onto it, I'm just kind of holding it, and I fall, I grab onto something, and as I fall, I'm likely to hurt myself. Okay, so carrying it tight in your hand like this is not safe in either direction. Okay? This is something that somebody might go, ooh, I'll do this because that's going to protect everybody. You're not protecting yourself because you fall, you're going to stab yourself in the hand. So the proper way to carry a sharp tool across the room is loosely at your side with the point away from you and others, so that if you trip or fall or somehow stumble or something goes on, you're likely to drop the tool rather than hurt yourself. Okay, so don't cut towards yourself. Carry it properly across the room. Make sure your tools are sharp. All right, now number 6, we're going to talk about the clamp, bench, vise stop. And it says while drilling on number 6, but this is pretty much a demonstration on how these things work. First of all, the boy who was chiseling that day, a couple options for him. One, he could have taken some let's do this the other way, some clamps and secured his work down. He would definitely have wanted 2 clamps because this is still going to be moving. But with a second clamp, he could have chiseled without it moving and he would have been safe. He wouldn't have had to worry about his board moving around on him. So securing your work with clamps is always a good option. Number 2, this is called a woodworking vise. This is basically it works like your combination lock in PE, meaning that you kind of clear it out by going backwards with it. And once you've done that, it should open and close freely on its own. But as soon as you start going clockwise, it's going to clamp down and secure your work. Okay, this is actually the position that the boy should have been in, because when you're working with the rabbit, which I'll talk to you later about, you should be chiseling down. Is the way that I intend you to do that. So this is actually the position the boy should have been in. He should have been working like this, is what he should have been doing, like this is what he should have been doing. So this is a woodworking vise, and the work has been secured here. There's one other nice way to use these woodworking vices, and that involves this here. Come on up in here close. You should notice that if you take the front of this thing right here, you can wiggle it, and it comes up. This just came up higher. And what that allows me to do is this with what's called a bench dog. This is a bench dog. It's also called a vise stop. And you can put these down in these holes here on the tabletop, which allows you to do that and secure your work this way, which did not work terribly well. And that allows you to work on the entire surface and have your work secured. Okay? While I have you here, I'm going to discuss this. When you're not using the bench vise, you want to make sure this thing is down. You want to make sure this thing is closed. And you want to make sure the handle is loose, like this. Because I don't want you to do this and have somebody come around the table and hit their leg on it like that. So the answer is the woodworking vise should be closed and the handle should be loosely down in this position here, so that somebody can walk around this table comfortably and not worry about bumping into anything or tripping or hurting themselves. Okay? Okay, number 7 is about the difference between a hammer and a mallet. Okay? So this is always a favorite demonstration. Kids always like this. This is a hammer. It's made of metal, hardened steel, most likely, and it is designed to be able to hit a nail and do its job really well. And it is this is potentially kind of brittle actually, although it's hardened steel, so it's typically not. But you should definitely be wearing safety glasses while working on a hammer and nails, because you never want to know when something's come flying at you. Now, I'm going to swing this fairly loosely down, and I want you, actually, I'm going to start with the other tool. This is called a mallet, okay? That one's a hammer, this one's a mallet, this is also a mallet, this is a rubber mallet, this is a plastic mallet. They are designed to do a different thing, but people think of them as the same thing. They're something to beat something on. I'm going to take this and I'm going to hit it pretty hard. I'm going to aim for that spot right there so I can definitely look for it. I'm going to feel for the dent. And I don't feel any dent at all. There's no dent in this board at all. Okay? Now I'm going to take the hammer, line it up, and I'm not going to swing very hard at all. And you can actually see that dent. I can feel it, I can see it. It's actually even broken a little bit. There's a little bit of a broken board right there, okay? And yet I didn't swing this very hard at all, and I put a dent in it. I can swing this very hard, and there's no dent. These are not the same things. Oh, my ear's ringing from that one. This is not the same thing. This is a hammer. It's got a hardened steel head. It is designed to deliver full force to whatever you're hitting, because you want to be able to put that nail in, have it in, done, okay? And this is going to cause damage to whatever you hit. This is designed with a plastic tip, a plastic head on it, and that plastic head will actually absorb some of the energy back into the hammer, or the mallet, this is not a hammer, back into the mallet, so that the energy you're applying to this thing hits, and some of that energy goes forward into the board, some of the energy comes back. It kind of maximizes out the amount of energy it's going to give into something. This is important because, first of all, if I'm trying to fit this board into a joint and I'm beating on it, if I'm beating on it with a hammer, I'm going to damage this edge right here, okay? But if I hit it with a mallet, even even if I swing harder with the mallet, it's going to push this board down into whatever I'm trying to put it into without damaging this edge. On the test, it talks about when you're working with wooden or plastic handled tools. This is a plastic handled tool, it's a chisel. Actually, my gouges are back there somewhere. This is a plastic handled tool. If I hit this with a hammer, I am potentially going to break this plastic and send pieces of plastic up into my eye, thus potentially damaging a tool and potentially causing a safety hazard where things are flying into my eye. Wooden like chisels and such end up mushrooming. I mean, the top of the chisel looks like this. Originally it's about that big, and then it kind of gets bigger and bigger and bigger as over the years people smash them with too much and they kind of mushroom over. So when you're working with a wooden or plastic handled tool, you always use a mallet, M-A-L-L-E-T, rubber, plastic, wooden mallets, never a hammer, okay? And that is definitely on the test. Number 13 is about safety goggles. We should always be wearing our safety goggles at all times in this class. As soon as we start working on the Pinewood Derby car, everybody's gonna have to put on their safety goggles every day, and we're gonna have to wear them every single day. And I will be very strict about that. You are not allowed to take your glasses off, put them up on the top of your head and walk around. You've got to keep your glasses over your eyes at all times. Number 14 is about the vise being closed. I already talked to you about that one. Number 15 is about a hand plane. These are hand planes. This one's actually called a jack plane, and this is a hand plane. This probably has a different name that I should know, but I don't know it at the moment. It's a hand plane, and it works very much like a razor. If I were shaving, it shaves off the surf a little bit at a time. You will be using this semester to make a round over. You'll be rounding over the edge of a board, very much like I am doing right now. I just rounded that edge. A hand plane is very much like a razor at home. It has a blade that sticks out like that at an angle. If I put this down on the tabletop like that, it's going to dull that blade. And it gets bumped around the table and potentially gets nicked or damaged. We want these things to be sharp. So when you're working with a hand plane, and it's at your table, but you're not using it at that moment, like I need to put this thing down for a couple seconds, they always get put on their side, like that. There's a place to hang, to put them on the wall over there on the back of the wall, and it's designed to kind of hold it up so that the blades are not touching the ground. So that's on the test as well. A hand plane at your station that you're not using needs to always be put on its side. Number 16 is about this thing, which is called a bench brush. A bench brush is what you use to clean off your tabletops rather than your hand. The obvious thing you might get is a splinter if you're going across the table with your hand. You could also, there could be a screw on the table or some sort of metal shaving for some random reason that I can't think of at the moment, but you know, you might cut your hand or damage your hand. That's why we have bench brushes. I also think of when you're using a drill press, sometimes you run your hand across that, try to sweep that, and you'll scratch the top of your hand with the drill bit. One way or the other, when you're sweeping or cleaning up, you want to use a bench brush, and you want to know the term bench brush. Don't use the term broom or small broom or anything like that. It's called a bench brush. You need to learn the lingo in this classroom. So use a bench brush to sweep or clean up after yourself. Okay, we're going to move all the way down. We already covered that one. Where are we at? I'm going to look at number 1 on the woodworking rules. And we're going to skip number 1. We're going to move on to number 2, which we already talked about. No coats, books, backpacks, or anything on the floor. We talked about that before. Number 9 is about cleanup. So when there's a 7-minute bell in this school, it's a cleanup. It's a PE bell is what it is. The PE bell rings at 7 minutes before the end of the period. That is typically the cleanup time, which means that I will call cleanup. And when I call cleanup, everybody stops working until everybody is done cleaning. And we don't say these things like, I didn't make that mess, Mr. Olson. Everybody cleans until everybody is done. And then I will, if you've done a good job, the room should get clean in 2 or 3 minutes because everybody's cleaning. And then we can all just kind of sit and relax and go to your backpacks or wash your hands or do all these other things you want to do before we leave, okay? The last thing on this page is about stools. I know all your teachers for many, many years have told you not to do this, leaning back in your chair, okay? There's a lot of reasons for that, and it's true in all of your classes, and I'm going to say it in this class as well because it's perhaps even more true in this classroom. It is more true in this classroom. There's a lot of bad things that can happen if you're leaning in your stool. One, you could damage the stool, which is the least of my concerns, but they do get damaged. If you look around at the stools in this classroom, you'll see plenty of damage on them. It's okay. You don't need to do that right now. But I could certainly point out this one. I'll show you this one since my videographer seems to want to see damaged stools that are broken and damaged stools. Okay, so that happens when people lean back in the chairs. You could also fall and hurt yourself. That's a pretty obvious one. You slip, you fall, you hurt yourself. And in this classroom, we have a woodworking vise on the corners of all these desks. Therefore, falling and hitting your head potentially is more dangerous than other classrooms. It's possible. So you might damage the stool, you might hurt yourself, you might fall and hurt somebody else. You might also fall into somebody who's working with a tool that causes them to hurt themselves. You might damage the project you're working on. You might damage somebody else's project. You might just make a big loud noise that startles the person across the room and causes them to hurt themselves while they're using a tool. Just absolutely just no leaning back in your chairs in this classroom for lots of different reasons is what you need to remember for the test. I could go through them all again, but I've already gone through them. There's a lot of reasons. Don't lean back in your chairs. 4 on the floor, as they say. Okay, so that's the end of this video, and we'll move on to the last video in a moment.